Ridley did not look up from his rifle when Garland walked into the staging bay. That was deliberate. She understood it immediately. The way a person who has spent years in institutional environments learns to read the grammar of disrespect. Not the blunt kind, which is at least honest. The architectural kind, built from posture and timing and the precise angle at which someone fails to turn their head. There were 14 men in the bay that morning. 13 of them looked up when the door opened. Ridley did not. Sergeant Nadia Garland set her kit bag down carefully beside the assigned rack and began her unpacking with the methodical calm of someone who has done this particular thing, walking into a room and becoming the wrong person in it, enough times to have developed a system for it. Slow, deliberate, no wasted motion. Everything placed with intention, nothing betraying the fact that her pulse had kicked up 3 beats the moment she crossed the threshold. She was 27, 5'6", 130 pounds in full kit. 2 tours with the 82nd Airborne, Kandahar, then Helmand, a marksmanship qualification score that sat in the top 2% of everyone who had attempted the Army's advanced sniper assessment over the past decade, and a face that, in Ridley's estimation, had no business being anywhere near a Ranger assessment and selection course. He said as much before she had finished unpacking. "Administrative's in the next building, Sergeant." He still hadn't looked at her. He was running a bore brush through his rifle barrel with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once been told he was in the wrong room. "You'll want to take a left out the main doors." A few people laughed. Not all of them. Garland noticed that too. There was a difference between the ones who laughed and the ones who went quiet, and that difference mattered. "I'm in the right building," she said. Ridley set his rifle down. Now he looked at her. He was 34, built wide across the shoulders, with 3 combat deployments and the particular kind of confidence that accretes in men who are very good at a thing and have never had that goodness seriously challenged. He was not stupid. He was not even, in the way some men are, reflexively cruel. He had simply built his understanding of the world around a set of assumptions so deeply embedded that questioning them would require pulling at a thread that held everything else together. "This is RASP," he said. His tone was almost kind, the way a teacher is kind to a student who has misread the course schedule. "Ranger assessment and selection, you understand what that means?" I applied, passed the preliminary screening, and was accepted. Garland folded her kit bag and set it under the rack. Same process as everyone else here. Sabo, heavy-set jaw like a boat cleat, spoke from across the bay without looking up from his own gear. "Preliminary screening's the easy part, sweetheart." LaRue, leaning against the wall near the window, smiled at the floor. Garland said nothing. She sat on the edge of the rack and checked her bootlaces. It was not passivity. It was selection, choosing which engagements were worth the cost of having them. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment and do that now. The rest of this story goes to places most people don't expect, and I think you'll want to be there for all of it. The assessment began at 0600. 22 candidates, now 23, assembled on the range at the designated hour. Colonel Cavendish, the selection program's commanding officer, was a lean man in his late 50s with gray at his temples and the unhurried manner of someone who has made enough decisions under pressure that the urgency has long since worn smooth. He walked the line once, said nothing, and handed off to Master Sergeant Breckinridge. Breckinridge was a different kind of presence entirely, compact, precise, with a voice like a door being closed firmly on a cold morning. He briefed the day's qualification shoot without adjectives. 5 rounds, prone supported, standard M110. 300-meter zeroing exercise first, then the qualification shoot at 500. Anyone who couldn't produce a tight group at 500 was already telling Breckinridge everything he needed to know. Garland zeroed her rifle without incident. She had done this particular process so many times that it had become almost meditative. The settling into position, the reading of air and light, the dialogue between shooter and rifle, that is less about sight picture and more about listening. She finished 11 minutes before the session ended and spent the remaining time watching the others. Ridley was good. She had known he would be. Combat veterans who reach his level of selection tend to have one thing in common. They have been tested in ways that strip away all the technique that is merely performed and leave only what actually works. His prone position was textbook clean. His trigger pull was consistent. When he stood up from the zeroing exercise, his expression was neutral, which meant he was satisfied. He glanced over at Garland. She met the look with nothing in particular. The 500-metre qualification shoot proceeded by station number. Garland was station 11. Ridley was station 10. He shot first. 5 rounds, each one breaking cleanly, the brass spinning out of the action and catching the morning light before disappearing into the dirt. Breckinridge's spotter called every shot. Center, 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 slight right, center. 4 out of 5 in a group you could cover with a playing card. The slight right was still inside the qualification circle by a comfortable margin. Ridley stood, pressed his mouth into a flat line that served as a smile, and turned to face station 11. "Don't hurt yourself," he said. Garland moved into position. There are shooters who become good through discipline, through the systematic application of technique until the technique is reliable. And then there are shooters for whom the process is something different. Less mechanical, more organic, as though the rifle and the body have reached an arrangement that goes beyond what can be consciously taught. Garland was the second kind. She had been the second kind since she was 16, shooting paper targets at a range outside Sudbury, with her father standing just behind her left shoulder, saying almost nothing, because almost nothing needed to be said. She breathed out, the reticle settled. 5 rounds, 5 hits. Her group measured slightly tighter than Ridley's when Breckinridge walked up to confirm the spotter's call. The range went quiet in a way that had texture to it, not silence. There was still wind and ambient noise from the base, but the particular quiet that happens when people recalibrate their expectations. "Station 11 takes it," Breckinridge said with no more ceremony than if he'd called a weather report. He made a note on his clipboard and moved on. Ridley looked at the downrange target for a moment, longer than necessary. Then he said the word he would use every time for the next 2 weeks: luck. Garland didn't argue. Arguments were a resource, and she was managing hers carefully. Lunch was an MRE eaten in the shade of the equipment shed. Garland had claimed a spot away from the main group, not because she required solitude, but because she required predictability in her immediate environment, and large groups of men who resented her presence were, at this particular moment, unpredictable. Corporal Nwosu found her anyway. He was 29, tall and spare, from Halifax originally. His mother had immigrated from Nigeria when he was 4, and he carried himself with the particular self-containment of someone who has learned to be unobtrusive in rooms where he was also not entirely expected. He sat down without being invited, which she noted, and opened his MRE with the methodical focus of a man who has made his peace with the contents. "That was a good shoot this morning," he said. "Thank you." He chewed thoughtfully. "Ridley's not going to let it go." "I know." "He's not a bad person," Nwosu said, and then stopped as though he'd hurt himself. He reconsidered. "He's not a good person right now. There's a difference. He's got a way of deciding what a thing should look like before he's seen it, and then everything that doesn't match the picture becomes evidence that the picture is right." Garland looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" Nwosu considered the question with apparent seriousness. "My younger sister applied to officer cadet school last year. They told her to reconsider." He paused. "She's going to be a better officer than most of the people who told her that, but she's going to have to work 3 times as hard to get there." He looked at his food. "I think about that sometimes. What it costs people to prove what shouldn't need proving." Garland was quiet for a moment, then, "She should apply again." She already did. Something in Nwosu's expression shifted toward quiet satisfaction. "She's in now." The afternoon brought land navigation in pairs. Garland was assigned to Sabo, who received the news with the stoic resignation of a man informed he will be working the holiday weekend. He said very little during the first 3 kilometers, setting a pace that was punishing without quite crossing into obvious sabotage, and Garland matched him without comment. What Sabo likely expected was a request to slow down. What he got was Garland reading the terrain ahead of him and calling bearing corrections before he reached for the compass. He checked her calls each time. Each time they were correct. By the 5th kilometer, he had stopped checking. By the 7th, cresting a ridge in declining light, having found their 3rd checkpoint 4 minutes under the target time, Sabo stopped and looked at her with an expression she had seen before. Not respect exactly, not yet, but the first crack in a wall that had been assumed to be structural. You navigate like someone who's been lost somewhere bad, he said. Helmand Province, she said, 2019. He was quiet for a moment, then fair enough. They finished the exercise second overall. Sabo submitted the timesheet without editorial comment, which from him, Garland assessed as approximately equivalent to a commendation. The night that changed things came at the end of the first week. Garland was cleaning her rifle in the equipment shed at 2200 hours, late, because she preferred to work without an audience when she found it. The scope mount on her primary rifle had been interfered with, not crudely. Whoever had done it understood enough to make it look untouched at a casual glance. But the torque values were wrong. After 50 or 60 rounds of sustained fire, the scope would begin to shift. The zero would drift. She would miss shots she had every technical reason to make. She checked her backup. Same. Garland sat for a moment in the low light of the shed and let herself feel what she felt, which was cold and careful fury, because anger without discipline is noise, and she couldn't afford noise right now. She was tightening the second mount when the door opened and Nwosu came in. He stopped when he saw her. Then he looked at the rifle, and his expression did something complicated. I followed them, he said without preamble. Ridley and Sabo and LaRue, they came in here after lights out. I didn't know what they were doing, I thought. He stopped. I should have come to you immediately, I'm sorry. Garland looked at him steadily. You're here now. There's something else. His voice dropped. There's a plan for the night navigation exercise on Thursday. They're going to intercept you at the furthest checkpoint. Remote, no instructor coverage for nearly a kilometer in any direction. Ridley's framing it as a conversation, an opportunity for you to withdraw with what he's calling dignity. And if I don't? Nwosu met her eyes. He didn't use the word pressure, but the implication was clear. Garland finished tightening the mount. She set the rifle down, checked the action, and was quiet for a long moment. How many? 5, Ridley, Sabo, LaRue, Hicks, and Tanaka. She nodded once. Don't do anything differently. Stay in that group. Attend whatever meetings happen between now and Thursday. And if they ask you to be part of it, they already did. Tell them you're in. She picked up the rifle and sighted through the corrected scope. The reticle was solid. I need the exact grid reference of that checkpoint by Wednesday morning. Nwosu looked at her for a moment. What are you going to do? Document it, she said, all of it. Pellegrino had been in the course for 9 days before Garland realized she was there. That was, Pellegrino would explain later, entirely the point. She was 31, a former military intelligence sergeant from Fort Huachuca, with dark eyes and the kind of stillness that registers as background noise if you aren't specifically looking for it. She had been the second woman in the room since day one. She had not made herself known to Garland because she had been, for 9 days, running a careful calculation about the risk of association. I know what that sounds like, Pellegrino said, when they finally sat down together in a quiet corner of the laundry block on Wednesday night. It sounds like I abandoned you. It sounds like a rational risk assessment, Garland said. Pellegrino accepted this. I watched what was coming, and I kept deciding it wasn't my fight. She looked at the floor. There's a problem with that logic. The fight doesn't stop just because you opted out. It goes looking for another target. She looked up. What do you need? What Garland needed was a recording device. Small enough to conceal in a collar. Long enough battery life to capture whatever happened Thursday night. Pellegrino had one. She didn't explain why. Garland didn't ask. Thursday came the way difficult things tend to come, with the ordinary texture of a morning that looks like any other morning until it doesn't. Briefing at 05:30, night navigation exercise, individual, 15 kilometers, 5 checkpoints, time limit, 8 hours. Garland drew her start time, clipped the recorder inside her collar, and checked her weapon with the extra attention she now applied to everything that could be interfered with. She tested the device in the equipment shed. Clear audio at 7 meters, clean pickup even with ambient wind. She pocketed it and went to the start line. She hit the first 2 checkpoints without incident, moving at a pace that put her behind the faster candidates, but well within qualification margins. She wasn't trying to win tonight. She was trying to arrive at checkpoint 5, the remote one. Nearly 2 kilometers from the nearest instructor station, with enough battery life on the recorder and enough composure left to keep her head clear. She heard them before she saw them. 4 voices, not 5. Tanaka had apparently reconsidered, and Garland adjusted her count without breaking stride. They were positioned near the checkpoint marker, not concealed, which told her that Ridley was still running this as a conversation, still giving himself the narrative of reasonableness. Garland. Ridley stepped out of the shadow of a tree line. His hands were loose at his sides. Behind him, Sabot and LaRue and Hicks formed a geometry that was designed to feel incidental. Good timing. Walk with me a minute. She stopped. I need to log this checkpoint. You'll get to it. He came closer. His voice carried that particular quality she had noticed before. Almost collegial, calibrated to sound like a private exchange between professionals. I want to be straight with you. I think you know you're not going to make it through selection. Not because you're not capable. And here he offered a concession the way some people offer concessions, as a rhetorical device rather than a genuine relinquishment, but because this isn't the right environment. The men in this unit need to trust the person beside them completely. And that trust isn't there. Has it been offered? Garland said. Ridley's mouth moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile. It's built, over time. Through shared experience, there are shortcuts people try to take. A pause that was precisely weighted, and those shortcuts don't hold up when it matters. You're describing the problem as structural when it's personal, she said. The trust isn't absent because of anything I've done. It's absent because of what I am. That's not the same thing. Something shifted in Ridley's expression. The conversational warmth retreated. I'm giving you an opportunity here. To step back before this gets harder. We can make it very hard. You already have, she said. My scope mounts my backup rifle. She watched his face. I know. The silence that followed had a different quality. Sabot shifted his weight. LaRue looked at a point, somewhere past Garland's left shoulder. What I'm telling you, Ridley said, and now the reasonableness was gone entirely, is that you need to withdraw. Tomorrow morning, medical pretext, whatever works for you. You leave this course with your record intact, and we all move on. Or we make sure you don't pass. He said it flatly. Not just here. We have relationships in the assessment cadre. We have influence over how evaluations get written and how scores get logged. This isn't a threat, Garland. This is information. Behind her, the low sweep of flashlights cut through the tree line before she saw the sources. 3 beams, then 4, and then Colonel Cavendish stepped into the clearing with Master Sergeant Breckinridge at his shoulder and 2 MPs flanking them both. Cavendish looked at the scene for a long moment. He looked at Ridley. He looked at the positioning of the 4 men around Garland. He looked finally at Garland herself. Sergeant, he said. Sir, you're going to want to give me what's in your collar. The interview took most of the following day. Cavendish ran it personally, with a JAG officer present and Breckinridge taking notes in the corner. They played the recording twice through. They asked Garland to identify each voice. They asked her to describe the condition of her rifles when she found the tampering. They asked about Nwosu's role, and she answered carefully. He had warned her, and that was different from participation, and she wanted that distinction preserved in the record. When it was over, Cavendish sent the JAG officer out and sat across from Garland with his hands flat on the table. Your father, he said. Garland Wenzel. Staff Sergeant Alan Garland, 3rd Ranger Battalion. Killed in action in the Korengal Valley in 2013, holding a position so his squad could extract. 2 of those squad members are currently serving in senior NCO roles. Cavendish looked at her with an expression that was difficult to categorize. Not pity, not nostalgia, something more considered than either. He never talked about having a daughter who shot. He didn't know I could until I was 16, she said. He was gone a lot. He would have known exactly what you were walking into here. She met his eyes. That's why I didn't use his name. Cavendish was quiet for a moment. He opened a drawer and set a form on the table in front of her. Medical withdrawal, no questions asked. She looked at it and recognized it for what it was. A door being opened, not a door being closed. She folded it in half and set it back on the table. With respect, sir, I'm not withdrawing. Cavendish picked the form up, considered it briefly, and placed it back in the drawer. He stood. Then I suggest you get some rest. Reassessment exercises begin Friday morning. You'll be partnered with Corporal Nwosu for the field phase. He paused at the door. Your father carried a spare piece of brass from a shot that mattered to him. He gave it to me in Kandahar in 2009 and said it was good luck. Another pause. I've been carrying it since. I don't suppose I need it anymore. He set a small tarnished shell casing on the table beside the coffee mug and walked out without looking back. Garland looked at it for a long time before she picked it up. Ridley and the others were processed separately. The details of what followed, the formal charges, the hearings, the career consequences, moved through channels that operate slowly and without drama. Ridley faced a formal conduct hearing. Sabo and LaRue received administrative separation. Hicks was reduced in rank. The particulars came to Garland in pieces over the following weeks, the way consequences tend to arrive when the system is working as it should. Nwosu was cleared without qualification. He had chosen a side before it was safe to choose one, and that distinction was preserved in the record. Pellegrino finished the course 7 days ahead of Garland. She graduated without ceremony, transferred to her receiving unit, and sent a single message: "You'll make it, keep going." The field assessment phase lasted 10 days. Sustained operations in pairs, surveillance positions, intelligence reporting, all of it conducted under the particular grind of accumulated exhaustion that separates people not by raw ability but by how they relate to their own limits. Garland and Nwosu worked with the efficiency of two people who have stopped having to negotiate the fundamentals and can direct their energy toward the actual problem. Their reports were consistently among the most detailed submitted. Their evasion of the opposing forces' search patrols over the first 72 hours was clean enough that Breckenridge mentioned it in the debrief without being asked. On the 7th day of the field phase, a search element passed within 6 meters of their observation position, close enough that Garland could distinguish individual voices clearly. She and Nwosu held without movement for 11 minutes while the element swept through and withdrew. Afterward, Nwosu exhaled slowly. "Your hide construction," he said. "The way you use the drainage depression to break the sight line from the ridgeline." "Afghanistan," she said. "You learn or you don't come back." He nodded once, and they went back to watching the road junction below them, and nothing more needed to be said. The graduation formation was held on a Tuesday morning in flat gray light that softened the edges of everything. 12 candidates from an original 23 stood in line on the parade square. The attrition rate was, by selection standards, within normal parameters. Colonel Cavendish moved down the line, pausing at each candidate, conducting the brief ceremony with the same unhurried attention he gave everything. When he reached Garland, he stopped. "Sergeant Garland, for consistent excellence in marksmanship, land navigation, fieldcraft, and sustained performance under conditions of significant personal adversity." He held her gaze for a moment. "Your father would recognize everything I just described." He affixed the Ranger tab to her uniform. Garland stood at attention and felt the weight of it, not the physical weight, which was negligible, but the accumulated weight of everything it had cost to be standing in this particular spot on this particular morning. Her father, who had gone away a great deal and come home less and finally not at all. The small tarnished shell casing she now carried in the left breast pocket of her uniform against her chest. The women who would come after her, for whom this moment would be a matter of record, rather than a case to be argued. She had not come here to prove her father's name. She had come here to build her own. Standing in the gray morning light with the Ranger tab on her shoulder, watching Nwosu receive his evaluation commendation, 2 positions to her right, she understood that both things could be true at once, that she was entirely her own, and that she carried everyone who had made her possible, and that there was no contradiction in that, only weight. She had always known how to carry weight.